Politics Uncensored with Ali Milani and Zoe Grunewald on Fubar Radio.
Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Zoe Grunewald.
And me, Ali Milani.
And on today's show, the government plans to end jury trials for crimes with expected sentences of under 3 years. Joining us to discuss the consequences of this will be journalist Ben Smoke. Then Pink News writer Amelia Hansford will be joining us to break down NHS England's review into HRT for trans adults.
As always, you can find us at Politics Uncensored UK on social media. But first, it's the week unwrapped.
From warnings over reputational risk to a £75,000 taxpayer-funded payout. And believe me, that is smaller than Peter Mandelson may have liked to receive. The first tranche of Peter Mandelson files have been published. It's only a small portion of the thousands of Mandelson files that have yet to be released. Firstly, Ali, where do you think the Mandelson files fall in the current order of the worst political files doing the round right now?
I don't think they're quite
They're
Epstein,
not Epstein
files.
No.
But probably more than what are the other?
I think they're the
I was
big
thinking
ones.
of like the Panama Papers
Yeah.
that broke, that sort of stuff.
There have been a lot of. Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this might be seen as the thing that brought down Keir Starmer. I was thinking about this the other day about if he goes in May. Clearly, it won't be the results just in May.
No,
because there's a lot of discussion about whether he's going to last past May, and I was just trying to map in my mind what were the significant moments. Was it Gorton and Denton? Was it the Mandelson stuff? Was it Gaza, other things? And I think the Mandelson files might be the most significant thing that he can kind of look back to and he'll be remembered for. But equally, I don't think these particular papers have had the impact that the story did when he first was forced or was sacked / resigned. Was he sacked or resigned? Was he forced to resign? One of them ones.
I mean, it even matters,
Yeah.
you know?
I
think he was sacked.
It's been a bit of a less of a story because obviously Iran is dominating the headlines, but also, you know what's really funny? So the main headline of these papers is that the government knew that there was a reputational risk. That what was it? One aide said that it was weirdly rushed, the appointment, and it was clear that Starmer had been warned that there was a serious reputational risk. It was flagged to Keir that Mandelson reportedly stayed in Epstein's house while he was in jail in June 2009, and noted that there was general reputational risk over his relationship with Epstein. Now, that is completely counter to the narrative that the government said at the time, right? Because the narrative that came out of government and Keir Starmer at the time was he lied to us, the implication being that they didn't know the extent of his relationship with Epstein. That's clearly not true, and because it's now being claimed and flagged that it was, again, flagged to Keir that Mandelson stayed at Epstein's house while he was in jail. But the reason I don't think it has any impact, it's one of those remarkable things. I don't think anyone believed it at the time when the government said we didn't know. And so now it's not as big of a story because, I would have expected it to be a big, hoopla that Starmer said he was lied to and indicated at least that he didn't know the extent of the relationship, and clearly the papers prove that he did.
Well, so, I mean, it's interesting because actually there still isn't the smoking gun in this tranche of papers, and we should say that there are more files that have yet to be released and some have been omitted due to the current police investigation into Peter Mandelson's alleged offence, or the offence he's been investigated for, which is misconduct in public office. Obviously, he denies wrongdoing. There isn't the smoking gun that he lied to Starmer. As you say, Starmer was clearly aware, or the government were clearly aware that he had a relationship with Epstein. But as you say, that was already well documented. So I think the key thing that we've yet to really see is this kind of lying thing. And when we think about what actually brought Boris Johnson down when it came to Partygate and Owen Paterson and all those things, it wasn't actually the crime of having the cake and the champagne during lockdown.
It was lying about it.
It was the lying about it. And it was the tying himself in knots about what he knew and what he didn't know, and was he ambushed with cake and all this kind of stuff. And this kind of whiffs of that, right? Like, it's kind of like at the point when you're splitting hairs of well, he didn't tell me the truth about the extent of his relationship. And you say, okay, but how can you have, how can you be arguing between the difference between best friend, stayed at his house, acquaintance? At some point, you just have to say, you are Prime Minister. There is no space for ambiguity here. You need to know exactly the right and the wrong. And Keir Starmer was the chief prosecutor. He was the director for public prosecutions. He should know above anyone else that a man who's famously slippery, who's nicknamed the Prince of Darkness, his word that, I was only sort of friends with the paedophile, I wasn't, like best friends with him, that shouldn't be enough to offer him the ambassadorial position.
No. So can I ask, what would a smoking gun look like then?
Well, and this, I think this is my point. This. Like, it's going to come down to ultimately, I don't think there's ever going to be an email that says, Keir Starmer says, okay, it sounds like they were really good friends, but do you know what? I think it might be fine. I mean, that would kind of, that would be a smoking gun.
I just think
it's probably going to be this he said, she said.
Yeah. And that's probably why you're never going to get that sort of, that smoking gun, like you say. I don't have a better term for it. No. But I just don't know what you need because it was. I'm trying to think if it was explicitly said or if it was indicated and implied. But it was definitely indicated and implied. Like Keir Starmer said that I didn't know the extent of that relationship. I thought they kind of knew each other. Was basically, but I didn't know. And now that we know that he knew that Mandelson reportedly stayed in Epstein's house while he was in jail, right? So.
But I think that was public knowledge anyway.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of it is just a bit kind of like, ultimately, the big question is how can you tolerate someone being friends with a convicted paedophile? And should that expel them from ever having a position of high seniority in the government? And I think most people would say
it's not just high seniority. It's probably the biggest diplomatic post.
But the elephant in the room, which no one can say out loud because the man is still in the White House, is they ultimately thought that link would be beneficial for relations with Washington. And I think that is the thing. They ultimately thought it was worth putting someone slippery in that role because they could speak the language of the US administration.
What do you think about this? Because one of the big headlines, if there were any, was that this fella Powell, who's one of Sir Keir's most trusted advisors, found Lord Mandelson's appointment. He called it weirdly rushed, and that he had been particularly cautious about the appointment. So it's not just that Mandelson was appointed despite this, but clearly, look, the government have kind of said that the process of appointing ambassadors is broken and we need to fix it, right? That's kind of been their thing, right? We need to overhaul the process, the sort of vetting process, which I think is nonsense anyway, but we'll put that to one side. But not only were there links and links known, but even that existing process, which the government have now called broken, was it circumvented or bent? Because they're saying it was weirdly rushed.
Sounds like it. I mean, and there was also a suggestion, I think, that that there may have been, I don't know if it was or just a suggestion that briefings might have been shared with Mandelson before his security clearance was complete. I think a lot of this shows you about how networks and influence were more important or more influential in number 10 at this point than the proper due diligence and process. And I think when you're Keir Starmer and you've basically marketed yourself as a prime minister who's going to be a stickler for the rules and a former lawyer, and it's quite clear that you're not abiding to that. I think that's problematic for your reputation. Let's move on because, there's the Mandelson files, but as you said already, there's plenty of other news happening this week. The Iran war continues as deaths across the Middle East continue to rise and concerns of rising inflation are mounting here in the UK. Lots has happened since we last spoke. There's a new supreme leader of Iran. We have lots and lots of concern about rising oil prices now the Strait of Hormuz has been closed. Ali, just take us through what's happening right now, the latest, and where you think we are. Yeah,
okay. So I'll talk about the new supreme leader first. So for folks who don't know, the Iranian system is there's a parliament and there's a president, but ultimately the guardian of what they call the revolution, which is the state in and of itself, is called the supreme leader. The translation isn't great. It's not actually supreme leader in Farsi. But
is it not?
No,
can I ask you why it's called the revolution if it's now the establishment?
Because it's a good question. The view is basically that when the Islamic Republic was established in Iran. Actually, the initial charter that was set up in 1979, but also called for the exporting of the revolution elsewhere and uniting the Muslim world as an all.
I see.
So the view is that basically the revolution continues. It's a little bit like, ironically, like the American system, which is in search of the perfect union, that the union is never complete. And it's kind of like that, though it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we'll leave that. And so the supreme leader is essentially in charge of both the state and the spiritual religious element. And they're supposed to be the guardian of the direction of the country. And there have been two. One was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who was the initial person who overthrew the Shah. He died very, very soon after the revolution. And in his place came the former president of Iran at the time, and still the former president of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And he was killed in the initial strikes, the very first strikes that launched the war. And so the Guardian Council of Iran has been sort of in session choosing the next supreme leader, and it has been a significant choice. So it was announced this week that Mojtaba Khamenei, who ironically wasn't an Ayatollah before, so he was granted the status of Ayatollah to become supreme leader. And to be an Ayatollah is basically the highest rank of a cleric that you can be, which he wasn't. But again, not to do an Iran history lesson, neither was his father when he was appointed as supreme leader. Now, the reason that this is significant is for a number of reasons. One, Mojtaba Khamenei wasn't the favored pick prior to the war. So Ali Khamenei had been ill for a very, very long time. He had cancer. And so there was a lot of discussions, and he was in his late 80s. So there was a lot of discussions about who the next supreme leader might be. And most experts in the field would have told you that Mojtaba Khamenei wasn't one of the ones that was touted. One, because, he just wasn't one of the favored candidates that folks would have thought would have taken it. But also, very significantly, Iran overthrew a monarchy. So the Islamic Republic overthrew a monarchy. To now replace the supreme leader with his son is a significant move.
Yeah, it looks more like a dynasty now.
It looks more like a dynasty. And it's one that they wouldn't have done prior to this war, I don't think. I think this selection of Mojtaba Khamenei is a sort of two fingers at the American and Israeli attacks. He is, if rumors are to believe, the IRGC candidate as well. So he's been able to unite the various factions. And then, again, not to do a big history lesson, but Iran has, like any state, has various factions. So you have the Revolutionary Guard, you have the army, the Besiege, the police, and others. And he's been able to unite them quite broadly. So one of the things that I have seen online said, which I think is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but does tell you about where Iran is that Donald Trump, when he first launched this war, went on TV and told the Iranian people to take their country back. He's now spent over $20 billion, if numbers are to be believed, killed thousands of people, including thousands of Iranians, American military personnel, Israelis have died in Israel. All of this has been done to make Khamenei younger. Khamenei went from 86 years old to now 50.
And presumably he's going to be, I've heard, and you can correct me, that he is extreme. He has also seen the death of many of his family members in these strikes. He's not going to be conciliatory with the American or the Israelis, right?
For sure not, no. Mojtaba Khamenei has actually been out of the limelight for most of his career. We know he has had significant influence, but he hasn't made loads of public speeches. He hasn't written a whole lot, so we don't actually know
much about him.
But we do know that he's a hardliner, that he's a part of the establishment, and we're just human beings, right? So we know he's had his mother killed, his father killed, and his wife killed.
I'm just saying, I don't think he's going to be like, do you know what? I think we should hear these guys out.
And he was himself significantly injured in the attacks. He was there when it was fired as well. So it's kind of a bold move by the clerics to pick him. We should also touch on, which you mentioned, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is where at least a third of the world's oil reserve has come. Iran has closed that strait. And the Americans have accused Iran of laying mines as well, which has essentially shot up oil prices. Oil prices hit $100 a barrel and has resulted in countries having to release their oil reserves. So this is one of the biggest tools that Iran has in its arsenal, is now both here in America and across the West. If you're going to put petrol in your car, you're going to see those prices rise as a result.
And do you think Donald Trump's voters are going to enjoy the paying higher prices at the petrol pumps? I mean, that's what he promised, right? He promised more foreign intervention and higher gas prices. Yeah,
and I think this is what is going to be one of the highest political costs for him. There are two main political costs that Donald Trump has faced so far in this war. One is American military personnel who've been killed, and now the oil prices and inflation that's not likely to go down. And then we have to remember, by the way, experts in this area have said if they open the strait today, so if Iran stopped, if they want everything stopped today, it would still take another 2 weeks before the strait returns to normal, right? So the longer this stays closed, the more oil reserves have to be used, the higher the price of oil goes, and then that's going to be felt by ordinary citizens, both in the US and in the UK.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you before we go to the break, and I'm going to ask you every week until the war ends. When's the war going to end?
Not for a long time yet.
No?
I don't think, even if the Americans wanted a ceasefire, I don't for the noises from the Iranian side are to be believed. I think we're looking at another 6 weeks at least. Okie
doke. Well, that is it for the week Unwrapped. Coming up, we'll be joined by journalist Ben Smoke to discuss the government's plans to partially end jury trials. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Zoe Grunewald.
And me, Ali Milani.
David Lammy's plans to scrap jury trials for crimes with sentences of less than 3 years has passed its first hurdle in the House, despite Labour rebels making their opposition known. Well, joining us now is the journalist and senior editor of Ralph magazine, Ben Smoke. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, just to kick us off, can you give us a bit of an overview of these plans? I mean, we've discussed it before on the show when it was first announced, but just let us know kind of where we're at and what the government's proposing.
So, the government's sort of fact sheet on it breaks it down into sort of 5 key bits. So they want to remove defendants' rights to elect in triable either way cases. Now that means crimes are split in between indictable, which are the some big ones, summary, which are your smaller ones, and then triable either way, which is sort of like depending on criminal damage. Do I do £5 worth of damage? Do I do £500,000 worth of damage? So it can go low, it can go high. At the moment, defendants have a right to decide. They're going to get rid of that. They're going to replace the automatic right to appeal to Crown Courts. So if you're in the magistrates, don't like what they've said, you can appeal up to the Crown Court. No longer automatically can do that. They're going to increase magistrates. So these are lay people. These aren't legally trained. They haven't kind of gone through rigorous legal training like lots of judges have and solicitors, etc. They're going to increase their sentencing powers up to 18 months to 24, but up to between 18 and 24 months. They're going to bring in trials by judge alone for very intricate cases like fraud. And then the big one, the one that we're going to be talking about, is introducing a new Crown Court bench division, which is to basically take away the right to a jury trial for a huge number of people. And these are cases that could be, it's 3 years or under, likely, in prison, like the punishment for. So that's sort of where most of the rub is coming from, and that's where most of, as you're talking about sort of vocal Labour MPs, that's mostly what people are upset about.
But I mean, we're focusing a lot on jury trials, and that is significant, and I think for people that is a very kind of visceral image as well, because juries are seen as a real cornerstone of our judicial system. But I mean, the other stuff you've set out there, that's pretty big. For example, expanding the powers of magistrates. I mean, that is also something to be concerned about.
It's not good.
No.
None of it's good. And it's quite interesting, I found. A lot of the very vocal MPs, Carl Turner et al., have been like, well, there's some good stuff in this bill. Where? Like, where?
Yeah.
Like, talk me through your reasoning on why you think it is expanding magistrates' powers is a good thing. You know, it's so depending on where you are in the country. I mean, I've got friends that work in the legal system, friends that are protest lawyers, are criminal lawyers, and it's you know, we can talk a little bit more about the sort of court estate, but the reality of like magistrates and going to magistrates and how much of a postcode lottery it is now for justice is ludicrous. I think it's the whole thing's farcical.
So is it true, from what I heard from what you said, you could go to court without a jury and then also lose your right to appeal as well?
So it's not completely losing your right to appeal. It's losing your automatic right to go to the Crown Court.
Right.
So what they're doing is, so obviously magistrates, lay people, pillars of the community, etc. Crown Court judges, generally people who have been called to the bar, who have experience, either as prosecutors, defenders, both. So when you go to the magistrates, you don't like what they've said, and you go, I'm going to appeal this, which is your right. Goes up to the Crown Court, so then it's heard by somebody with actual specialist legal knowledge. What Labour are saying and what the government are saying is no longer are you allowed to automatically do that. There's going to be this sort of vetting process, kind of like what there is with the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court only sees the biggest appeals on the points of law. So it's sort of this gateway, which, in effect, when you actually look at it, does reduce people's access to justice. To just call it a complete blanket would not necessarily.
In my mind, I'm trying to get to understanding why Keir Starmer is doing this. Now, that might be a fool's errand doing anything with why Keir Starmer does anything, right? But let's try and assume there's reasons. You would imagine that this is the sort of things that a government led by people who have no experience in the judicial system would do, right? That there's a backlog, which is the reason that they've given, right? There's a backlog. We need to clear the backlog. Fuck it. Get rid of all the rules, right? But we're talking about Keir Starmer, who brandishes himself, he tells the postman every morning that he was former DPP, right?
And his dad was a toolmaker.
Yeah, and his dad was a toolmaker. And David Lammy, I imagine, wears those funny wigs to breakfast. So these are people who should have an appreciation, right, for our judicial system.
There's a long and, at this point, noble history of lawyers turned politicians ravaging our judicial system. Suella Braverman was a solicitor.
Well, that just tells you anyone can become a solicitor.
I think, you're right. Like, backlog is enormous. There are Crown Court cases now being scheduled for 2029. There are a record high number of magistrates cases in the backlog. Between July and September last year, I think it was like 360,000 or maybe 160,000, can't remember. One of those numbers. It was big. And the reality is that that's only going to get bigger with these reforms, because what you're doing is you're bumping a few from the Crown Court into the magistrate system without really, 50% of courts in this country pretty much have shut since 2010. The funding gap between where we were at in 2009, 2010 to now is about 30% for justice.
So is that the real problem then?
Yeah, that's
the reason
issue.
we have. I was going to ask, why do we have the backlog?
Yeah,
right.
It's because the Tories absolutely decimated our justice system. They took an axe to it. They took it apart, and now we're sort of looking at this place where there are, as I said, 50% of courts have been shut. I think there's about 60% of constituencies that don't have an active court within them across the country. Legal aid has been absolutely decimated. Yes, the government, to be fair and to be slightly even-handed on this, yes, the government in Rachel Reeves did announce 2.7 billion, I believe it was, settlement for courts and judiciary. It's 3.4 billion needed to plug just the gap in funding, let alone, I've got friends that work in, as I've said, and we've talked about how they've been in a Crown Court, and water's just started pouring through the ceiling. Like, these places are, I've been to court, like, they are falling down.
It's not a metaphor to say they're crumbling, right? They are physically crumbling.
Yeah.
I just want to take a moment to reflect on a really powerful intervention from a Labour MP. I've got a clip here. This is Charlotte Nichols. She's a Labour MP, I believe, for Warrington North. Let's listen to what she had to say.
I care profoundly about rape victims facing intolerable delays for their day in court. I know only too well what that feels like, as after being raped at an event that I attended in my capacity as a Member of Parliament, I waited 1,088 days to go to court. Every single one of those days was agony. In this debate, experiences like mine feel like they've been weaponised and are being used for rhetorical misdirection for what this bill actually is. The violence against women and girls sector haven't had the opportunity to come together to discuss it, and the government's framing and narrative has been to pit survivors and defendants against each other in a way I think is deeply damaging. Don't say that this bill helps deliver justice for rape victims until it actually materially does.
I should just say that is parts of her speech stitched together. Just, we're not making it very clear. We don't want a Newsnight moment here. Really powerful intervention from Charlotte Nichols, which I think makes a really interesting point, that these proposals are really far-reaching. They're going to fundamentally change how people interact with our criminal justice system. And yet they haven't even brought in VAW campaigners or specialists to talk about how this might impact victims. For a government that says it's putting forward these reforms to try and help get access for victims quicker, it just undermines that, doesn't it?
I mean, yeah. So I think the point on Charlotte's intervention, which was like an incredible, moving, brave. I hate that term, but it was brave. But also, what an absolute what a shame on the government that it's got to that point that a survivor of that has to waive their anonymity in such a public way to make, because clearly this is a government that does not listen, does not care. What its Labour MPs are telling it, what campaigners are telling it carries on going. So the fact that she's had to do that is disgusting. And Labour, like the government, should be hanging their heads in shame. I think I was looking on the way here, I was looking at the 2024 manifesto and what it said about justice, and it was all
Any of this
woolly.
in there or no?
Oh, no. It's very woolly. There was a little bit about what Charlotte Nichols is talking about here in terms of victims of rape and sexual assault and making sure that they are prioritised. Absolutely none of this. And the reality is that like coming into, and I think we need to look at this in a broader context of what's been happening with the way in which Labour have been coming down really hard on people that have been taking action for Palestine, the way in which they prescribed Palestine action, what this looks like in terms of a much bigger picture of rights in this country, which have already been subjugated by successive bits of legislation and precedent underneath the Tory party, underneath the previous Tory government. So, are we any closer to a proper situation where victims, survivors, people who've experienced that kind of like deep and traumatic event? No, of course we're not. We're further away. What we're much closer to, actually, is a lot of people being even more locked out of a justice system on all sides of the court than they already are.
Ben, can I ask you about the politics of this?
Yeah, sure.
Been a lot of people kicking off about this. Carl Turner being at the front of it. He did an LBC interview that's my favourite thing I've ever seen, which was he was just screaming down the camp.
He also sent a message into LBC while Darren Jones was on air, asking them to ask Darren Jones about this particular thing, which I thought was
That's
pretty cool
funny.
move, yeah.
It's like that rumour that went around about Trump calling in using a fake name. Is there any chance that this doesn't go through? So I know in the second reading there was some dissenters, obviously, but it went through fairly comfortably. But I was at a parliamentary event that day, and a lot of MPs told me that they were voting it through just for the debate, but at third reading stage that they weren't going to support this. But Labour have a pretty big majority. Any chance this doesn't go through?
I think that's such hogwash, isn't it? I think those are the words that I used when I quote tweeted Carl Turner, who is, let's put it in actual, real blunt terms, a coward. You cannot spend weeks you're moving like this, grandstanding, texting into LBC to get them to ask Darren Jones to say a thing. And then on the day that it goes to a vote, go, actually.
Okay, I didn't know.
No, he abstained. He abstained because he said that the Labour whips had threatened to remove his whip, which is not only cowardice, it's also completely politically illiterate. If you have looked at what has been happening for the Starmer administration over the last 6 months, and you think that they're in the same position that they were in when they removed the whip from the MPs that voted with the SNP motion on the King's Speech when they first got into government, then you're a fool.
But there was also a number of MPs that did vote against this, right?
Yes, I think 10 Labour MPs.
John McDonnell did.
Richard Bergen,
Becky
Nadia
Long-Bailey
Whitton.
did. Yeah.
And did they have the whip removed?
Not as far as I know. No.
Of course they didn't. Because what what planet is Starmer strong enough to do that?
But let's assume they're not BSing, right? That at third reading stage that they will push back. I'm just trying to do the parliamentary arithmetic.
Yeah.
So it passed by about 100 this time. I just can't see there being enough opposition to this to not go through Parliament.
I think the thing is that it's so, I hate this word, but freebrow in the sense that I think
you hate it. I don't know what it means.
It's just sort of, it's every single time anything happens in Westminster,
Right.
Everyone's like, it's febrile. It just means like everyone's getting a bit leery.
Yeah.
Everyone's jumpy. Things are moving constantly, very quickly. Keir Starmer looks very different as a Prime Minister this week than he did 2 weeks ago before Iran.
Yeah.
It really, really depends on how high Keir Starmer's stock is, I think. Actually.
I'm glad you said stock is, because how high Keir Starmer. Well, he doesn't have much.
No.
Right?
No, he
so
doesn't.
and that's I guess that's the if I'm an MP, which the people of Uxbridge and South Ruislip made sure I wasn't, I'm thinking through the capital that the government has, right? So if I don't like this, I'm certainly thinking, I don't know, if I'm Carl Turner, I'm thinking you don't have the capital to remove the whip from me, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't have the capital to remove the whip, but it relies. This government is relying on people like Carl Turner to be cowards and to not stand up for that. You cannot spend weeks and weeks and weeks saying this is one of the most fundamental attacks on our legal system, fundamental attacks on our constitution that I've ever seen. But also, I'm going to abstain.
Yeah, that's
just like
that's mad, Carl. What are we doing? Just quickly then, you spoke about the prescription of Palestine action. There's obviously also ID cards. There's been a lot of murmurs on the left and the right of politics about Starmer being an authoritarian. Are you worried, if we're really truly heading towards the idea of a reform government, how do the things that this Labour government are doing now make it easier for an authoritarian, Trump-like reform government to consolidate power?
What I think is quite interesting is we always, and I'm guilty of it as well, we always talk about it in terms of like what happens when there is a reform government. But let's actually look at the facts. Let's look at what policies this government are bringing in. This government are bringing in, ID cards. They're trying to get rid of various different parts of jury trials. Their immigration policy is an utter disgrace. They've tried to put through, vicious cuts to disability benefits. They've tried to keep on with two-child benefit cut. This is a reform government. The Starmer administration, the Starmer premiership, whatever you want to call it, is one that is predominantly pushing through policies. And that's not to say there aren't some mildly milquetoast good ones, but overwhelmingly the big beats of this government would not be far away from a Nigel Farage speech. So what we're actually seeing, I think, is the beginning of that. And it's quite, and we've been seeing this for ages. And I don't want to sort of get to like, oh God, hyperbolic or hysterical about it. But I do think it's really important to recognize the drip, drip, drip. And if you even take it back 10 years ago to sort of 2015, 2016, you had demonstrations, you had people kind of airport incursions for various things around Heathrow, etc. The way that was handled, the way that the Crown Prosecution Service, the way that the government talked about, implemented justice is completely different to what's happening now with various different processes for various different causes or beliefs. And that's because there has been this steady drip, drip, drip. So consolidating power, we're already there. And that's what I think we should be scared of. And that's why I think we need to be holding these Labour MPs' toes to the fire. And be like, well, if you don't believe in this, and I don't think lots of them do, and I'm not even sure Keir Starmer does, he's gone, he's beyond saving. But if you are a Labour MP and you don't believe in this, my God, stand up. Stand up and have a backbone. And the people of this country are so tired of being fed this nonsense, equivocation, we're going to keep some of the things in and third reading, blah, blah, blah. If you don't like it, vote it out.
Don't be Carl Turner.
No.
Ben, thank you so much for coming
you.
in. That is Ben Smoke, senior editor of Ralph Magazine. And Ben, your Instagram handle is @BenCSmoke.
Yeah, that's good.
Smoke your real surname?
Yeah.
It's a great surname. And make sure you check out the link in the description to find out more of his work. Coming up, is trans healthcare under threat? Joining us will be Amelia Hansford to discuss the NHS England review into hormone replacement therapy for trans adults. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Politics Uncensored with me, Zoe Grunewald.
And me, Ali Milani.
NHS England is to conduct an evidence review into hormone replacement therapy for trans adults, a move which is concerned, which leaves some concerned about trans people's ability to access medical care. Well, joining us now is journalist, writer and speaker Amelia Hansford. Amelia, thank you so much for being here to talk to us about this. You obviously wrote an article about this review for Pink News. Can you just give us a breakdown for listeners who might not be familiar with this about what we know so far?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I will, it's quite a complex situation. So it's one of those things where it's quite hard to boil down. But just the long and short of it is right now, on Tuesday, NHS England announced that they were banning new prescriptions for trans under 18s as part of this kind of new public consultation that they're planning to sort of do. As part of that, sort of consultation, they've released what's called an Equality and Health Inequalities Impact Assessment, or an EHIA report, which is quite a mouthful. And in that report, they've effectively said that as part of this consultation, they're going to be doing 10 separate evidence reviews. And these are going to be into various different aspects of sort of trans healthcare broadly, regardless of age. And one of those, which is the crux of the article that we published, a couple of days ago, was that it's going to look into the effects of what's called MAF hormones on trans adults. Now, what are MAF hormones? So that stands for masculinizing and feminizing hormones.
Right.
It's effectively, so when you're a trans adult, and in some cases a 16 to 17-year-old, you will be put on MAF hormones.
Not the same as puberty blockers.
No, so
No.
yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
sorry. I just
So-
wanted to make that clear. Yeah.
No. That's a very, very good clarification to make. So MAF hormones are predominantly things like testosterone and estrogen. They, when you're on what's called hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, you effectively are taking a blocker to get rid of the unwanted hormones, and then you take a replacement hormone, which is the MAF hormones, to get the desired sort of effect. Puberty blockers are different in that they suppress unwanted hormones in typically youth. They're given to youth. And one thing I want to very much clarify, because again, this is something that I imagine everyone listening and you two here have heard a million times, but they are physically reversible. They are reversible. It doesn't matter what anyone says. Like, the current evidence right now shows that they are reversible.
What, the puberty blockers or all of the drugs?
The puberty blockers, yeah.
Okay. Amelia, I'm going to ask you what might be some really basic questions, but I'm just trying to get my head around it because I failed science, right? So HRT would be, for example, stopping testosterone in the body or reducing it, and MAF would be introducing more estrogen into it. So they're different, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
So HRT, think of HRT as kind of the umbrella treatment.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah. And so for instance, myself, I every few months will take something called decapeptyl, which is an injection. I get one every 3 months. What that will do is suppress the testosterone in my body. And then every morning, I will administer estrogen gel. So I'll do 3 pumps of estrogen gel in my arm, sort of rub it in, and then that will, over time, give me the hormones I need.
Okay. So what I'm trying to ascertain is why NHS England have done this on Tuesday, right? Is it to review the efficacy of the drug, how effectively it works, or is there something else at play? What's the reasoning behind this move?
So that's kind of a multifaceted question. From the ground level, no one really knows.
What have they said?
What they have said is, so it's worth mentioning that the new prescriptions ban that's been implemented is for MAF hormones for 16 to 17-year-olds. Because if a trans young person is on puberty blockers, which it's worth mentioning, they cannot right now. There is no way to ascertain puberty blockers right now in England and Wales, and sporadically in Scotland and other parts of the UK. So if a trans young person was on puberty blockers, they would be given MAF hormones at 16 and 17 as kind of a transitional phase to go to that. So the justification on their part is effectively that they feel that there's not enough evidence to justify MAF hormones for 16 to 17-year-olds, and they're effectively going, well, we might as well do adults at the same time. And
there's not enough evidence of what? Of it not working, or what? I don't understand. Evidence of what?
That's the problem, is that they kind of will just say not enough evidence. The crux of what keeps being said by the health department and NHS England is that there's not enough evidence of the effectiveness versus the drawbacks.
If that's the case, I'm really sorry. If that's the case, then what does the age of the individual taking it matter?
So in terms of MAF hormones specifically, the problem regarding that is that puberty blockers are better because there's certain aspects of puberty that you don't want to kind of like mess with, and so puberty blockers are better because it kind of like stops those things from happening. In terms of like MAF hormones specifically, they are kind of just seems to be this like stream of we need to review, we need to review, we need to review. And it's just kind of getting a bit out of hand.
As you've said, puberty blockers are reversible. These hormone prescriptions, as we know, are really important to transgender people who need them in improving their quality of life. The evidence for the medication, I mean, I don't know what the evidence is for the medication being, for the drawbacks of the medication. You said that they have some concerns about that. But presumably a lot of this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like what you're alluding to and what I'm feeling reading this seems ideological rather than motivated by evidence, right? Because clearly, as you say, things are reversible. If you hear from the trans community about what these treatments have done for them, they have been positive. We know that there are some people who have had difficulties with puberty blockers or who have wanted to reverse their treatment. But, what do you think is behind this? Does it feel like it's ideologically motivated, is essentially what I'm asking.
So I think the first crux of what you're asking is to just kind of put into perspective
where this is coming from.
Yeah, where this is coming from. Or rather, the truth that about puberty blockers, if you will. So I've been speaking a lot to a clinical psychologist called Dr. Aidan Kelly, who is the head of Gender Care. They're a private trans healthcare provider. They're actually the only CQC outstanding registered one. So they're kind of, they know what they're talking about. So Dr. Kelly has kind of clarified that these hormones these blockers are they're incredibly effective at what they do. There's evidence to suggest that trans young people are less likely to regret taking puberty blockers than people are to have children. Like more people regret having knee surgery than taking puberty blockers.
Right. Wow.
But the thing is that what's happening is that I've heard from a lot of people, and independent journalist Erin Reed, who's quite big on this stuff, sort of alluded to this. But NHS England has an incredibly high threshold that they have for what they think is like admissible evidence for the effectiveness of puberty blockers. There's loads of evidence out there. Like we would be here for days if I were to cite every single thing, but they just have this threshold, and like you say, it's purely ideological. And we've heard from a lot of people that it is ideological.
Can you tell us a bit about what restricting gender affirming care is doing to transgender young people in the UK?
It's killing them. That's the long and short of it. There was a report from Good Law Project that the number of suicides by trans youth surged around the time that the puberty blocker ban was implemented. And I want to clarify here that the puberty blocker ban was implemented because there's a lot of sort of misinformation that's being spread. The puberty blockers ban was not implemented in 2024 when Wes Streeting extended it. It was implemented during the Sunak government. What Streeting did in 2024 was he extended it indefinitely, which is a horrible thing to do. I think we can all agree with that, but it's something that's worth clarifying. And when that was implemented by Sunak's government, that level surged. There's other evidence that shows that previously well-adjusted kids are just being turned into effectively shells of themselves. Just previously happy, previously doing what young people do, and now they're just sat at home, depressed. And yeah,
I just want to make this a little because we've spoken a lot about the drugs, but what impacts this has day to day on the lives of a trans person, for example. So what does this move mean in reality, for a trans person? What drug are they now no longer getting access to, and what does that look like? What impacts does that have?
So in terms of the adult care review, at the moment, thankfully, there's no removal of medication.
The worry is that's to come down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That came from a block of new prescriptions of MAF hormones for young people, 16 to 17-year-olds specifically, because it's worth noting that, as I said, MAF hormones don't they're not given to younger people as much as people might say otherwise. And so what that means is that there's kind of this precedent being set, this very incredibly worrying precedent, that not only would it become restricted, you wouldn't be allowed to sort of access these, but if it goes the way of the puberty blockers ban, it would actually be a criminal offence to administer these to a young person. And what that results to is what's called self-medicating or DIY in the community. That's a complex situation. I think we don't really have enough time to talk about that. But
and
could it be that actually these drugs only become available through private means? I mean, or would it always be the case? Obviously, it's a review, so we don't know. But it might be that it becomes illegal for anyone to prescribe it. Could it just be that it's no longer available on the NHS? Is that another concern?
I think right now the concern is more to do with how the NHS approaches it, because usually what will happen, and I think this kind of happened with the puberty blockers ban, is that anything that sort of is enacted by NHS England, they will eventually sort of extend to private healthcare. So it's more so, the problem more so right now is almost this justification, like you say, like, why are they doing this? There's no real justification at the moment. It's
I'm just surprised that if NHS England are saying something about the efficacy of the drug, surely they have to publish the data that they have on. So, for example, I'm on medication for something that I have to take pretty much every day, right? If NHS England suddenly said we're reviewing whether you can have that medication because of its efficacy, I would expect, okay, you have to show me where that comes from. They don't have to do that at all?
No, they do. So they've done that as part of this review. The problem is that, like I say, the threshold
is so high.
And so with the puberty blockers ban, that kind of keys into what's going on with West Streeting and the puberty blockers trial right now, where they published that, but did it in a way that obfuscated the kind of the impartiality concerns that were being raised at the time.
And just talk to us, because we're running out of time, but this is about reducing access to healthcare for trans people, but more broadly, how is this government being in any way supportive to the trans community? I mean, restricting healthcare obviously is a huge thing, but is that also, are we seeing other curtailing of trans rights on other aspects of government policy?
So I want to be clear here. Wes Streeting has, on two separate occasions, said that trans women are not women. Two separate occasions. He said it once in 2024. He said it again in 2025, just days after the UK Supreme Court ruling on For Women Scotland, which obviously, for people who might not know, effectively has set the precedent that trans women are not women. That's a whole other thing. So I want to make that clear. Wes Streeting has said that trans women are not women twice. Keir Starmer, or so much as number 10 representing Keir Starmer, has said that following the Supreme Court ruling. So they have specifically declared that they are siding with transphobia in this instance. That is transphobia. There's no if ands or buts. If you say that trans women are not women, you are being transphobic. What a lot of, and this is where it gets so complex. This is where the problem gets so complex, is that the problem right now is attempts to minimize the problem, the issues that they're causing, because they, firstly, again, don't believe that trans women are women, trans men are men, but that they are so fundamentally ignorant about what's going on. It's so difficult. And I mean, we've heard from like the World Professional Association of Trans Health saying that the puberty blockers trial itself, it violates things on informed consent and whatnot.
Amelia, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we are getting to the end of the show. I'm sorry. We loved having you in, and we'll definitely get you back in. But unfortunately, that is it from Politics Uncensored today. Please join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. when we unwrap the week's political talking points.
You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani.
And me at Zoe Grunewald.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at fubarradio.com or via the Fubar Radio app.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.